What if the greatest king in history was not merely a ruler of men, but a master of the invisible world? While history remembers Solomon for his wealth and wisdom, hidden traditions speak of a man who held the unpronounceable name of God in his hands. A king who sealed entities with words. A magus who built a temple for something that cannot be contained. The world knows the story of a king blessed with unmatched wisdom. But what if that's merely the surface of a far deeper mystery? What if Solomon's true legacy was not his kingdom of stone and gold, but his mastery of the architecture of reality itself? Beneath the biblical verses and historical accounts lies a figure who haunts the dreams of mystics and mages across millennia. Not just Solomon the Wise, but Solomon the Magus Regis, the mage king, whose shadow stretches across esoteric traditions from Cabala to Hermeticism, from Freemasonry to Sufism. Our world celebrates power that can be seen, armies, wealth, political influence. But the true masters have always been those who operate beyond the visible, those who understand that physical reality is merely the shadow of deeper forces. Solomon stood at this threshold, with one foot in our world and one in the realm beyond. In the ancient world, a name wasn't merely a label. It was the vibrational essence of a thing. To know the true name of something was to know its metaphysical structure, to master it. And Solomon, according to the Kabbalah, knew more than just any name. He knew the Shem Hamephosh, the 72-letter name of God, a cosmic keyboard through which reality itself could be played. While ordinary kings impose order through force, Solomon achieved dominion through language, through naming, through vibration, through the sacred word. Where others saw chaos, he perceived pattern. Where others fought against darkness, he sealed it, subjected it to the order of the word. He turned chaos into structure. The Temple of Solomon wasn't merely an engineering feat or a house of worship. It was a code, an architectural mandala, a spiritual machine operating across multiple dimensions. It translated divine fire into stone, writing the sacred into matter. The Holy of Holies, a perfect cube, stood as the symbol of stabilized earth, the meeting point between heaven and the material plane. This ring was not merely an ornament. It was the seal, the boundary between the visible and invisible. Engraved with the Shem Hamephosh, the 72-letter name of God, it granted Solomon authority over spiritual entities that most humans cannot even perceive. According to the Testament of Solomon, with this ring, the king invoked, interrogated, and subjugated demons and spirits, not for power's sake, but to incorporate them into his great work. The 72 spirits described in the Ars Goetia, often called the governors of hell, must be understood not as demons in the Christian sense, but as forces of nature, as astral intelligences, as the inverted faces of the 72 sacred names. They represent the raw powers of creation that must be ordered, not rejected. Solomon didn't banish the dark side. He integrated it. For what is wisdom if not the ability to see the whole, to embrace both light and shadow. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. These words from Ecclesiastes reveal the paradox at the heart of Solomon's journey. The Solomon who mastered the divine name is also the weary initiate who sees through the void, who perceives the impermanent axes of the world. He is perhaps the first literary figure of the divided self, both master and slave of his lucidity. Wisdom is a blade that cuts through illusion, revealing a vision of the world that is naked, shapeless, almost unbearable in its truth. Solomon's request for Chokhmah, wisdom, was not a plea for practical knowledge, but for access to the Logos, the creative word, the underlying pattern. And what he saw both elevated and burdened him. What does it mean to perceive reality as it truly is, stripped of comforting illusions? This is the tension that makes Solomon not just a historical king, but an enduring archetype. He stands at the crossroads between the visible and invisible, between temporal power and eternal wisdom. He is both the master who sealed 72 spirits and the man who fell into idolatry, both the builder of the temple and the weary voice of Ecclesiastes who declares all is vanity. What if this contradiction is not a failure of character, but the inevitable consequence of straddling two worlds? Across millennia, Solomon's shadow stretches through the secret histories of humanity. In Cabala, he is the bearer of Daat, the hidden knowledge that unites the opposing poles of the tree of life. In Freemasonry, he stands as the supreme archetype of the builder, who organizes chaos according to sacred proportions. In Islamic esotericism, Solomon controls the elements and the jinn, symbolizing the illuminated soul. What power did this figure hold that he continues to haunt our collective imagination? What secrets did he truly possess? As we peel away the layers of myth and legend, a profound question emerges. What if Solomon's greatest legacy was not his wealth, not his temple, not even his wisdom as conventionally understood, but his method, his way of seeing beyond the veil, his understanding that the visible and invisible are not separate realms, but aspects of one reality that can be navigated by those who hold the keys. Join us as we unlock the esoteric side of King Solomon, a journey through the hidden dimensions of humanity's most legendary mage king. The Kabbalistic tradition views Solomon as more than a wise king. He is the embodiment of Daat, the hidden sephirah that reconciles mercy and severity on the tree of life. His wisdom wasn't merely intellectual brilliance, but a lived integration of opposites, the visible and invisible, the material and spiritual, the light and shadow. Through Solomon, the divine word descended into matter, forever changing humanity's relationship with the sacred. In Freemasonry, Solomon stands as the supreme archetype of the builder, not merely of physical structures, but of order itself. The temple becomes a symbol of the great work, organizing chaos according to divine proportions, translating celestial blueprints into earthly reality. The collaboration between Solomon, King Hiram of Tyre, and Hiram Abiff represents the fusion of wisdom, strength, and beauty, the three pillars necessary for any transformative endeavor. In Islamic mysticism, Sulaiman ibn Daud is not merely a historical king, but a prophet with dominion over the elemental world. The Quran describes how he commanded the wind, understood the language of animals, and controlled the jinn, beings of smokeless fire that exist parallel to humanity. But Sufi interpretation goes deeper, seeing in Solomon the illuminated soul that has mastered the elements of its own nature, bringing the unruly aspects of self under divine guidance. The Gnostic texts offer perhaps the most radical interpretation of Solomon, seeing in him both the potential for direct spiritual knowledge and the trap of mistaking external forms for inner truth. In the Pistis Sophia, Solomon's wisdom is compared to gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of the divine. Yet his attachment to material power and external ritual represents the danger of becoming trapped in the world of the demiurge. Here, Solomon becomes a complex symbol of humanity's dual potential. Yet, for all his mastery, Solomon's story includes a profound fall. The biblical account speaks of how his foreign wives turned his heart toward other gods. Esoteric traditions interpret this differently, suggesting that the very weight of wisdom, the burden of straddling visible and invisible worlds, created an unbearable tension within him. Perhaps this is the deeper meaning of the legend that Solomon eventually lost his magical ring to a demon, who cast it into the sea. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. These words from Ecclesiastes reveal a Solomon who has seen through the illusion of permanence, who recognizes the transitory nature of all worldly achievements, even his own legendary wisdom and power. The Solomon who speaks here is not the triumphant king, but the weary initiate who has glimpsed the void behind appearances. Yet paradoxically, this recognition of impermanence is itself a profound spiritual insight, one that connects Solomon to the Buddha and other great teachers who point to the liberation found in accepting transience. The heart of Solomon's esoteric legacy lies in the Holy of Holies, that perfect cube within the temple where the Ark of the Covenant resided. This innermost sanctuary, entered by the high priest only once a year, represented the point where heaven and earth meet, where the divine presence dwells among humanity. In esoteric terms, it symbolizes the achievement of the great work, the perfected self, where spirit fully inhabits matter. Solomon's greatest achievement was creating a structure that could house this paradox, containing the uncontainable, giving form to the formless. The medieval grimoires attributed to Solomon, texts like the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, claim to contain the actual methods by which he achieved his legendary mastery over spirits. These works detail elaborate rituals, magical seals, hours of planetary power, and incantations for summoning and binding various entities. While historians date these texts to the medieval period, they represent humanity's enduring fascination with Solomon's methods, the belief that his approach to reality contained practical techniques for navigating the invisible world. At the heart of Solomon's power lay the Shem Hamephosh, the 72-letter name of God, derived from Exodus 14:19-21. Kabbalistic tradition teaches that when these three verses are written one above the other and read vertically, they yield 72 three-letter names. Each name represents not merely a label, but a specific divine force operating in creation. Solomon's mastery came from understanding that these weren't separate deities, but aspects of a single divine consciousness, keys to different frequencies of reality. By knowing these names, he could attune himself to specific divine qualities and manifest them in the world. Gershom Scholem, the greatest modern scholar of Kabbalah, wrote that the temple was the architectural incarnation of the tree of life, the fundamental diagram of divine emanation. Its proportions, materials, and layout weren't arbitrary, but corresponded precisely to cosmic structures. The seven-branched menorah represented the seven lower sephirot. The two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, symbolized the pillars of mercy and severity. The Holy of Holies corresponded to Keter, the crown, the highest point of divine manifestation. By walking through the temple, one was symbolically ascending or descending the tree of life itself. The key to Solomon's mastery lay in his understanding of language, not as mere communication, but as the fundamental vibration that shapes reality. In esoteric Jewish tradition, the 22 Hebrew letters are not arbitrary symbols, but cosmic forces, the very building blocks of creation. When God spoke the world into existence, these letters were the instruments of manifestation. Solomon's wisdom included knowledge of how these primal sounds could be arranged and vibrated to affect both visible and invisible realms. His mastery of names wasn't about labeling reality, but about resonating with its deepest structures. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. These words reveal Solomon not just as a master of cosmic forces, but as a man who carried the burden of seeing too clearly. This is the paradox of wisdom. The deeper one sees, the more one recognizes both the beauty and the transience of existence. Solomon's journey through esoteric knowledge led him ultimately to a profound humility, recognizing that even the greatest magical operations and spiritual insights are themselves impermanent waves on the ocean of being. Solomon's enduring relevance lies not in the historical details of his reign, but in what he represents, the human being who stands at the threshold between worlds, who learns to operate in both visible and invisible dimensions. His story reminds us that true mastery is not about dominating reality through force, but about understanding its patterns so deeply that one can work with them rather than against them. In an age of material reductionism, Solomon calls us back to the recognition that consciousness and language shape reality as profoundly as matter and energy. The legend tells us that Solomon eventually lost his magical ring, cast into the sea by a demon who had temporarily usurped his throne. This mythic element speaks to a profound truth, that even the greatest wisdom and power may be lost, that no human mastery is permanent. Yet the story doesn't end there. After a period of humiliation and wandering, Solomon recovers his ring and his throne. suggesting that true wisdom, once attained, can never be completely lost. To the soul that has experienced it, the fall becomes part of the journey itself. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Solomon's legacy is how it transcends religious and cultural boundaries. His figure appears in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic texts. His methods echo in Western occultism, Eastern mysticism, and African traditional practices. His name is invoked in medieval grimoires and modern magical systems alike. What power did this figure hold that he continues to haunt our collective imagination across millennia? What secrets did he truly possess that we still seek to recover? The answer may lie not in historical facts, but in what Solomon represents: the eternal human quest to bridge the visible and invisible worlds. The 72 spirits described in the Lesser Key of Solomon have been interpreted as demons by some traditions, but esoteric understanding reveals a more nuanced truth. These entities, with names like Baal, Agares, and Vasago, represent forces of nature, aspects of consciousness, even the inverted faces of the 72 divine names themselves. They are not evil in essence, but raw powers that must be understood, bound, and directed. In psychological terms, they embody the shadow aspects of the human psyche that, when integrated rather than rejected, become sources of wisdom and power. The esoteric dimensions of Solomon's temple extended far beyond its religious function. Its proportions embodied what later traditions would call the golden ratio, the divine proportion that appears throughout nature and creates harmony that resonates with human consciousness. The dimensions of the Holy of Holies, a perfect cube, represented the stabilization of divine energy in matter, the perfect balance of the elements. These aren't merely aesthetic choices, but technologies for aligning earthly and cosmic forces. Modern science is only beginning to understand how certain proportions and geometric forms affect consciousness and energy in profound ways. The two pillars at the entrance of Solomon's temple, Jachin and Boaz, represented fundamental polarities: establishment and strength, mercy and severity, the feminine and masculine principles of creation. In Kabbalistic understanding, these correspond to the right and left pillars of the tree of life. Solomon's wisdom wasn't about eliminating these opposites, but understanding their necessary tension and bringing them into productive balance. This is the essence of the middle pillar, the integration of opposites that creates a third force, a transcendent understanding. In every esoteric tradition, this reconciliation of opposites is the hallmark of the highest wisdom. While we often focus on Solomon's external operations, his temple, his magical ring, his control of spirits, the deeper esoteric traditions suggest these were merely outward manifestations of an internal transformation. The true temple was his consciousness. The true ring was his will aligned with divine purpose. The spirits he mastered were aspects of his own being brought into harmony. This understanding transforms Solomon from a mere worker of wonders into an exemplar of human potential, one who achieved what various traditions call enlightenment, gnosis, or devakut, mystical cleaving to the divine. His external mastery flowed from his internal realization. The arc of Solomon's life, as interpreted esoterically, follows the classic threefold path of spiritual development. In his youth, he sought wisdom above all else, the phase of purification and preparation. In his maturity, he wielded tremendous power through his understanding of divine principles, the phase of illumination and mastery. In his later years, as reflected in Ecclesiastes, he transcended even his own achievements to recognize the ultimate unity beyond all forms, the phase of union. This pattern appears across mystical traditions, from Christian mysticism's purgative, illuminative, and unitive ways, to the Vedantic paths of karma, bhakti, and jnana yoga. The evolution of how we understand Solomon's ring mirrors the development of esoteric thought itself. At the exoteric level, it's a physical talisman with magical properties. At the mesoteric level, it represents energetic patterns and vibrational keys that unlock aspects of reality. At the esoteric level, it symbolizes the awakened consciousness that recognizes its own divine nature and authority. Each level is true within its domain, but the deeper interpretations reveal that the ultimate ring of power is consciousness itself, the awareness that binds and unbinds reality according to its level of realization. The physical temple of Solomon was destroyed first by the Babylonians and later by the Romans. Yet its esoteric blueprints survived, preserved in mystical traditions that understood its true significance lay not in the stones, but in what they represented. This pattern of destruction and preservation reveals a profound truth. External forms may perish, but the inner templates of wisdom endure. The Kabbalists teach that the heavenly temple exists eternally, that its earthly manifestation was merely a shadow of this higher reality. Perhaps this is why Solomon's legacy continues to resonate, because it speaks to patterns that transcend physical destruction. Solomon's esoteric legacy didn't flow through a single channel, but branched into diverse traditions, each preserving and developing different aspects of his wisdom. The Jewish mystical traditions preserved his understanding of divine names and the cosmic significance of the temple. Islamic esoteric schools developed his mastery of the invisible world and control of elemental forces. Western occultism focused on his methods of spirit evocation and magical operations. Each tradition is like a facet of a jewel, reflecting a different aspect of the same light. Together, they form a more complete picture than any single tradition could provide. In our modern age, interest in Solomon's esoteric legacy has not diminished, but transformed. Contemporary seekers approach these ancient teachings through new frameworks, seeing the 72 spirits as psychological archetypes to be integrated, understanding divine names as vibrational patterns that affect consciousness, or interpreting the temple's proportions through sacred geometry and its effects on energy fields. What was once expressed in the language of angels and demons is now explored through quantum physics, psychology, and information theory. Yet the fundamental questions remain the same. How does consciousness interact with reality? What is the relationship between language, thought, and manifestation? Perhaps the most significant evolution in how we understand Solomon's methods is the shift from external to internal operation. What ancient texts described as commanding external spirits, we now recognize may also be interpreted as mastering aspects of our own consciousness. The elaborate rituals and talismans can be seen as technologies for focusing intention and aligning different levels of awareness. This doesn't invalidate the possibility of objective spiritual entities, but it reveals that the boundary between inner and outer realities is far more permeable than our modern materialist paradigm suggests. Solomon's true magic may have been his recognition that consciousness itself is the primary creative force in the universe. What if Solomon's greatest insight was understanding that consciousness doesn't merely observe reality, but participates in creating it? Modern quantum physics has demonstrated that observation affects the behavior of particles at the subatomic level. Neuroscience shows how our expectations and beliefs literally shape our perceptual experience. The ancient understanding that as above, so below, and as within, so without, anticipated these discoveries by millennia. Solomon's mastery of names and language may have been based on the recognition that reality responds to how consciousness labels, categorizes, and focuses attention upon it. The boundary between magic and consciousness may be far thinner than we imagine. Solomon stands as the archetypal threshold figure, one who successfully navigates between the visible and invisible worlds, between conventional reality and the deeper patterns that shape it. This position is not unique to him, but represents a potential available to all humans who develop the capacity to perceive beyond ordinary awareness. The mystic who experiences divine unity, the artist who captures eternal archetypes, the scientist who discerns underlying natural laws, the healer who works with subtle energies, all stand at this same threshold. Solomon's enduring appeal may be that he represents what we all sense is possible: consciousness that is not trapped in materiality, but can operate across multiple dimensions of reality. If we were to rebuild Solomon's temple today, it would not be a physical structure in Jerusalem, but a new understanding of how consciousness interfaces with reality. The outer court would be our engagement with the material world. The inner court would represent emotional and mental mastery. The Holy of Holies would be direct experience of our divine nature. This temple is being built not with stones, but with practices, communities, and technologies that help us navigate between dimensions of experience. From meditation to sound healing, from sacred geometry to consciousness research, we are rediscovering what Solomon knew: that the human being is designed to be a living temple, a meeting place between heaven and earth. The Ring of Solomon, esoterically understood, is not an external talisman, but the achieved integration of our fragmented selves. When our conscious mind, subconscious patterns, emotional nature, and spiritual awareness come into alignment, we naturally gain authority over our inner and outer worlds. The spirits that once seemed like external demons to be controlled reveal themselves as aspects of our own psyche to be understood and integrated. This doesn't diminish Solomon's achievement, but elevates it, showing that the ultimate magical operation is the transformation of consciousness itself. The great work of becoming whole. To everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. These words from Ecclesiastes reveal Solomon's ultimate wisdom, not the mastery of spirits or the building of temples, but the profound acceptance of life's rhythms and the recognition of impermanence. This is not resignation, but liberation. The understanding that true wisdom includes embracing the full spectrum of human experience. The Solomon who wrote these words had transcended both the pursuit of power and the rejection of the world. He had arrived at what Zen would call the ordinary mind, seeing reality clearly without the distortions of craving or aversion. This may be his greatest legacy, not the magical operations, but the wisdom that follows them. Solomon's esoteric legacy is not a fixed set of teachings, but a living tradition that has evolved through dialogue with each era and culture it encounters. Jewish mysticism elaborated his understanding of divine names and the cosmic significance of Hebrew letters. Islamic esotericism developed his mastery of jinn and elemental forces. Western occultism systematized his approaches to spirit communication. Modern psychology reinterpreted his wisdom as a map of consciousness integration. Each generation doesn't simply preserve Solomon's wisdom, but actively participates in its evolution, adding new insights while remaining connected to the core principles he embodied. This ongoing conversation between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding ensures that Solomon's legacy remains vital rather than becoming a museum piece. What draws us to Solomon across the millennia? Perhaps we recognize in him our own unrealized potential, the capacity to operate not just in the visible world of matter, but in the invisible realm of consciousness and energy. His story reminds us that the human being is designed to be a bridge between worlds, capable of perceiving and working with multiple dimensions of reality. When we study Solomon, we are not merely investigating a historical figure, but exploring what is possible for consciousness itself. His achievements become not distant legends, but invitations to discover our own relationship with the visible and invisible aspects of existence. The 72 names that Solomon mastered represent a complete map of consciousness and its interaction with reality. Each name is not merely a label, but a specific quality of divine energy expressing through creation. Modern interpretations see these as fundamental patterns or frequencies that underlie both external reality and internal experience. When we work with these names, whether through traditional invocation, meditation, or contemporary methods like sound healing, we are tuning our consciousness to specific aspects of the whole. The mystical traditions teach that these names are not arbitrary, but correspond to actual structures in consciousness and creation, a periodic table of spiritual elements that can be learned and applied. The Seal of Solomon, often depicted as a hexagram or pentagram, operates simultaneously at multiple levels of meaning. At the literal level, it's a protective symbol used in magical operations. At the energetic level, it represents the perfect balance of opposing forces, spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, active and receptive. At the highest level, it symbolizes the achieved state of consciousness, where apparent opposites are reconciled in unity. This multi-layered nature is characteristic of all genuine esoteric symbols. They are not merely signs pointing to concepts, but technologies that actively connect different levels of reality, allowing consciousness to move between them. The symbol in physical form is like a doorway through which awareness can travel to subtler dimensions. The evolution of esoteric practice, from Solomon's time to our own, reveals a consistent pattern. What begins as external ritual gradually becomes internalized as direct work with consciousness. The elaborate temple becomes the inner sanctuary of meditation. The magical ring becomes the focused will and clear intention. The spirits to be commanded become aspects of our own psyche to be integrated. This doesn't invalidate external practices, which remain powerful technologies for consciousness transformation. Rather, it reveals their ultimate purpose: to bring about changes in awareness that eventually render the external forms unnecessary. As the Hermetic axiom states, as above, so below, as within, so without. The outer and inner operations are reflections of each other. Solomon's temple was never meant to be a final achievement, but a prototype, a model for how the visible and invisible worlds can be brought into alignment. Each generation is called to rebuild this temple anew, not with stones, but with understanding. Not in a single location, but wherever consciousness seeks to bridge dimensions. The true legacy of the Magus Regis, the Mage King, is not found in ancient artifacts or texts, but in the living tradition of those who continue his great work. The ongoing effort to harmonize heaven and earth, to bring the divine pattern into manifestation, to stand at the threshold between worlds and serve as conscientious intermediaries. In this sense, Solomon's work is not historical, but eternal, as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago. As we conclude our exploration of the esoteric side of King Solomon, we're left not with final answers, but with an invitation to see beyond the veil of ordinary perception, to recognize the invisible dimensions that interpenetrate our material world, and to develop our own capacity to operate as bridges between realms. The Magus Regis offers no dogma, only methods, no certainties, only possibilities. His legacy is not a closed book, but an open door, one that has remained accessible across 3 millennia to those with eyes to see and ears to hear. The question is not whether Solomon's esoteric wisdom was real, but whether we are ready to undertake the inner work necessary to verify it through direct experience. The threshold awaits. Will you cross it?